Hello again, Year 11. So obviously we've been having a look at Scrooge and his journey to redemption, but also mood and atmosphere this week more specifically. The two do link into each other, so obviously please do keep thinking about Scrooge's redemption. So a little bit of a longer do now this morning, just to see what you can remember from the last couple of lessons and to check that you are engaging fully with them. As I did say, today we are going to work our way towards planning a response to an essay question. Unfortunately, because at the moment we don't know when home learning is going to end, you are going to have to start doing some essays at home. And it's something that I've not made you do previously, because obviously some of your engagement with online learning isn't great. But for me to get a true insight into what grade you're deserving of, I need you to keep working and I need to keep seeing these essays. So please do make sure that when I tell you to do the essay, you do it and you send it in to me. So spend 10 minutes having a go at these do now questions for me. I'm not going to go through the answers because you should have them in your book from last lesson, but obviously we will talk about some of the details in the next couple of tasks. Okay then, so this is the extract that we are going to use for your essay question, and we're going to answer the question, so how does Dickens create mood and atmosphere in this extract, and how does Dickens create mood and atmosphere in the novella as a whole? So you should know by now that for A Christmas Carol you'll be given an extract like this one. You are expected to pick one quotation from the extract and explain that in your response, and then you have to remember a quotation from elsewhere in the novella that is to do with the question topic. So that's why we focus so heavily on remembering quotations. So I'll read this through with you the first time. Remember, you are looking for one quotation that tells us something about the mood and atmosphere in this extract. So Scrooge took his melancholy dinner in his usual melancholy tavern, and having read all the newspapers and beguiled the rest of the evening with his banker's book, went home to bed. He lived in chambers which had once belonged to his deceased partner. They were a gloomy suite of rooms in a lowering pile of a building up a yard, where it had so little business to be that one could scarcely help fancying it must have run there when it was a young house playing at hide and seek with other houses and forgotten the way out again. It was old enough now and dreary enough, for nobody lived in it but Scrooge, the other rooms being all let out as offices. The yard was so dark that even Scrooge, who knew every stone, was fain to grope with his hands. The fog and frost so hung about the black old gateway of the house that it seemed as if the genius of the weather sat in mournful meditation on the threshold. Now it is a fact that there was nothing at all particular about the knocker on the door, except that it was very large. It is also a fact that Scrooge had seen it night and morning during his whole residence in that place, also that Scrooge had as little of what is called fancy about him as any man in the city of London, even including, which is a bold word, the corporation Alderman and Lively. Let it also be borne in mind that Scrooge had not bestowed one thought on Marley since his last mention of his 7 years dead partner that afternoon. And then let any man explain to me, if he can, how it happened that Scrooge, having his key in the lock of the door, saw in the knocker, without its undergoing any immediate process of change, not a knocker, but Marley's face. Marley's face. It was not in penetrable shadow, as the other objects in the yard were, but had a dismal light about it, like a bad lobster in a dark cellar. It was not angry or ferocious, but looked at Scrooge as Marley used to look, with ghostly spectacles turned up on its ghostly forehead. The hair was curiously stirred, as if by breath or hot air, and, though the eyes were wide open, they were perfectly motionless. That and its livid colour made it horrible, but its horror seemed to be in spite of the face and beyond its control, rather than a part of its own expression. As Scrooge looked fixedly at the phenomenon, it was a knocker again. To say that he was not startled, or that his blood was not conscious of a terrible sensation to which it had been a stranger from infancy, would be untrue. But he had his hand upon the key he had relinquished, turned it sturdily, walked in, and lighted his candle. So spend 5 minutes now having a read back through it for me. You only need one quotation to explain the mood and atmosphere in the opening of the novella. So you need to pick out one quotation from this extract that you are going to talk about in your essay. Okay, so I'm hopeful that some of you have actually given this a go on your own before just skipping on, because you know I'll give the answer. So I've picked a quotation out for us to have a look at together to help you to produce a response to this essay question. So I've chosen the fog and frost so hung about the black old gateway of the house, okay? Now obviously in our previous discussions of quotations, you should be able to tell me quite a lot about fog and frost because we've talked about them in quite a lot of depth. So what I'm going to do on the next slide is I'm going to explode the quotation. So what you should do with whichever quotation you've picked is also explode it in your book at this point. Okay, so this is an explosion of the quotation that I have chosen. So the fog and frost so hung about the black old gateway of the house. When I'm exploding any quotation, I'm always thinking of all the different elements that a PCOR is going to want from me. So the first thing it's going to want to know is, what am I saying about the mood and atmosphere? Well, I'm saying that in the opening of the novella, it's dark and mysterious, okay? Then I know that I would include my quotation. So the next thing that I need to think about is how I'd explain the quote. Well, the quotation suggests that Scrooge's home is covered over by frost and fog, and that could further represent his isolation from society. So not only is his character isolated, but actually his living quarters are isolated from others also. Then I had to think about some keywords that I could explore, because we know that obviously in your PCOR you'll have to explore some keywords. So I thought about fog. So I started off by defining what fog is. So it's a thick mist that covers things and makes it so we are unable to see. And then we've already spoken about how this can link to Scrooge. So the idea that Scrooge is blind to the suffering of the lower classes at this point in the novella, linking back to this idea that the opening of the novella is quite dark. Okay. And then secondly, I thought about frost. So frost obviously links to cold and to items being frozen. And again, this links to Scrooge and his behaviour at this point in the novella, referencing his cold attitude towards the lower classes. So we know that this is where he says, you know, decrease the surplus population. We know that he has a very negative attitude towards the lower classes. So all of this information is going to help me to produce my first PCOR. You might be wondering why I've put mysterious on the end, because obviously as you're reading A Christmas Carol, in the first part you don't understand that it's supposed to be about redemption. So all we're seeing is a really grumpy old man, and as a reader I'm sort of thinking, well, where is this text going to go? Okay, so that would be my quotation for the first PCOR. My suggestion would be, let's write your introduction and your first PCOR this lesson, and then next lesson we can have a look at elsewhere in the novella and write in the second half of your essay. Okay, so this is just a reminder about overall how an essay should look, okay? So you should write an introduction, you should include why Dickens wrote the novella, and then link to the focus of the question, which is this one is mood and atmosphere. Your first paragraph has to be focused on the extract, so you're going to talk about a quotation from the extract. Your second PCOR is going to think about how mood and atmosphere is created in the novel as a whole. And then your conclusion is going to be you summarising your thoughts. Now, overall, you should spend 45 minutes on an essay. By my calculations, we should have 20 minutes left of this lesson, so that should be half of your time. And then I will be kind of give you the whole of the next lesson to finish the essay off after I've explained the secondary quotations. So you should be able to write this essay. There's no reason as to why being at home is going to stop you from producing essays, and I'm certainly going to expect to see them, and I'm going to want to use them to come up with that grade obviously at the end of this academic year. So if you move on to the next slide, I've done a PCOR structure for you to show you obviously all of the different stages. I'm not doing a model because I know that some of you will just copy it. So unfortunately, because of past experiences, you get that help taken away from you. However, there are sentence starters. We have looked at a quotation together, so you should be able to piece that information together for a response. Right then, so you're going to give yourself 5 minutes now to have a go at writing your introduction. So you're going to tell me what type of novella A Christmas Carol is to begin with. You're going to tell me that it delivers the moral message, and you're going to tell me what that moral message is. And then you're going to tell me how Dickens uses the mood and atmosphere, remembering that he uses mood and atmosphere to further emphasise Scrooge's redemption within the novella. 5 minutes, have a go. So, as promised, I've created some sentence starters for the PCOR. Remember that we have done that quotation explosion previous in the lesson. You should have done one for your own quotation in your books. So you should be in a really good position to create this PCOR. It shouldn't be overly difficult, okay? Make sure that it's finished by the end of this lesson. We're going to move on to the second PCOR and the conclusion next lesson, and then I'm going to ask you to submit them to me. Obviously, if you are worried or if you feel like you're doing it wrong, please do drop me an email. We can discuss it via email, that's absolutely fine, and we can get you on the right tracks. Make sure you also complete the Show My Homework quiz for this lesson, please.